Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Food for Thought Live. And please don't attempt to adjust your screen. This really is the early signs of a mullet that I'm developing. It's not a fashion choice. It's just a byproduct of lockdown. We'll get it dealt with as soon as possible. Welcome back. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back, and thank you for your continued support. We adore having you guys join us because that's what it's all about. It's about keeping everybody together, keeping everybody proactive and engaged in the cause that we all adore so much. And if you are watching on YouTube tonight, by the way, do give consideration to giving us a thumbs up and, more importantly, subscribing to our channel. Because, of course, the more people that subscribe to our channel, the more times will appear in other people's suggestions, and therefore people get these really important messages from the wonderful people that we're introducing to you on these forums. So the other thing I wanted to draw your attention to, which during this I'll find a link to, and or Giles will, because he's a genius like that, and we'll direct you to one of our viewers, Darren Coombs, who's very kind supporter and viewer on almost every episode I think we've had so far, made a wonderful suggestion of creating a discussion forum for you guys to continue the discussion after these conversations. So that's such a great idea that we went away and set up the discussion group on the back of the Food for Thought documentary Facebook page. So you'll find that there, and we would encourage you to join it, because if you want to get involved in the conversation after these broadcasts that we do, that's the great place to do it, all in one place with all the people that were also on the broadcast. So please do join us over there on the discussion group. So as I've always said at the beginning of all of these broadcasts, it's my huge privilege to be able to bring to you some of the most influential people in conservation, in animal welfare, animal rights. All of them have these incredible qualities of being thought leaders and of being heroes to me, and they inspire me, and I hope that they'll inspire you, and we also aim to empower you, as I've said in the past. And you know, with this particular guest this evening, what makes me feel very proud to bring this man to you is the fact that I feel there's a huge, in fact, crucial importance, that we have a responsibility to educate ourselves to the extent that we then support and advocate for the right kind of conservation. And when I say the right kind of conservation, I mean effective conservation. And my guest tonight really epitomizes that, and does so through the organization that he runs as well. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Paul Gardiner, who's the CEO of the Mantis Collection. Hey, Paul, how are you tonight?
I'm very well, thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your channel tonight. I'm very privileged to be here. I really am. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're so privileged to have you. And of course, I have the advantage of knowing why I'm so privileged to have you, and just what incredible insights and stories you've got to share with us tonight. And you know, there's so much. We were just enjoying a conversation prior to going live about Born Free and Virginia McKenna, who obviously was a previous guest. And what people might not realize is just how linked we all are, and how the story it goes way back, and it's such a beautiful story. And so, you know, we're gonna have a conversation tonight about the Mantis Collection and the conservation work that you're involved in. But I thought what would be really wonderful, if you'd be so kind, is if you could share some background on the Shamwari Game Reserve and the story about how that came to be, because I think it's absolutely incredible, and as I said, all linked with some of our previous guests as well.
Absolutely, Dan. So, well, just to put me in the right position, I'm actually sitting in the UK in lockdown here. I've lived in the UK for 18 years now, but my upbringing was a very privileged one, in that I was alongside my dad, getting to experience what he did at the time as a youngster. So it was one hell of an experience, and I'll take you on that little journey. So if you go back to and we're talking South Africa now. So if we go back to the 1800s, after the Napoleonic Wars, there was a real Great Depression over here, socio-economic crisis in the UK and the rest of Europe. And the British government thought to themselves, well, what are we going to do about this? And they obviously had a colony that had been formed down in South Africa. And the immediate thought was, okay, well, let's send a bunch of people down to South Africa, and in particular to the Eastern Cape. And that was the arrival of the 1820 British settlers. And they arrived in the bay of what is known today as Port Elizabeth, or Nelson Mandela Bay. And of course, they were all issued with ox wagons and oxen, and they were told to go and settle the land. And so they started trekking into the Eastern Cape of South Africa, and of course, they started to clear the land, as you can see in this image here. And the area was very rich in that it had the big five, your lions, leopards, buffalo, rhino, and leopard, amongst many other species of antelopes and birds and all kinds of stuff. So over a period of about 150 years to 200 years, virtually everything was wiped out. And then my father arrived on the scene in 1989, and he had been looking to buy his little patch of land in Africa. He was a businessman and serial entrepreneur, and he stumbled across a tiny little piece of land in the Eastern Cape. And the reason why he wanted that piece of land, this is it, was because it was equidistant to where my brother and I were at boarding school, and my parents lived in Port Elizabeth. So this was a little meeting spot for weekends. And he had just kind of got out of another business that he was in, and it was time for him to look for the next best thing as a young sort of 45-year-old. He was my age pretty much.
Right.
And he then the next farmer, he bought this little patch of land. It was 1,000 acres, and you can see how ruined and depleted it was. There was nothing to it. But then the next farmer said, listen, would you be interested in my land? And then the next farmer, and the next, and the next. And he ended up with about 10 blocks of land. And he thought to himself, well, what the hell is he going to do with all of this now? And then he stumbled across the most fascinating book. It was published by a lecturer from the local university. And he had taken all those manuscripts from the 1820 British settlers. And they used to diarize everything in the back of their great big Bibles and write about their animal encounters in 1820. And it was all about the black rhino and the lions and all these species. And so this lecturer had published this book, and Dad stumbled across it and started reading up on all the wildlife that the British had encountered 200 years prior. And that was the blueprint for what he was about to do. So he started to bring back all these animals to this part of South Africa that hadn't existed there for so many years. And this is a great image of him. It's almost one of the first images that was taken of him at what was soon to become Shamwari Game Reserve. And then, of course, he used that blueprint because all the wildlife encounters had been listed, and he started to rewild and bring the species back. And it was from the smallest to the biggest. We started with some young elephants, and then the rhinos arrived, and eventually, after a period of about 10 years, in 2000, it was time to bring back the predators. And the first big predators to arrive back in the Eastern Cape. The last one was shot out in 1879 with the lions. And the story is a great one because he had to, there were no lions in our area, so we had to get lions from way up north, beyond Johannesburg, at a game reserve called the Pilangsberg and another one called Madikwe. And you'd lay them down in an aircraft like this. This is one of the actual photographs. So no cages. And you just made sure you had enough antidote to keep them sleeping. I think it was about a 3-hour flight. And so we loaded all the lions on, and the last lion was a big male lion. And on he came, and the whole aircraft fell on its bum like this and crashed the aircraft.
Wow.
And so I was on board with a bunch of media and a band called Mango Groove. And we all had to bail out the airplane and let the lions continue, because obviously if the drug ran out, there was going to be serious implications.
Amazing.
So they left us in the middle of this dirt airstrip in the middle of absolutely nowhere. But they got there on time. I mean, the lions did start waking up in the plane, and fortunately they landed in time. And the roar of the lion was heard in the Eastern Cape after a period of about 150 years again. So it was a real achievement.
Oops. I mean, what an incredible achievement to go from, what did you say that they were pineapple farms?
Yeah, there were pineapple farms, tobacco farms, wheat, and then cattle, sheep, goats. The land had been completely decimated. There was nothing to it. And of course, when you start rehabilitating land and you start putting the rightful animals back on that land, it's quite incredible to see what the transformation is. Very quick, actually. And then you're suddenly hearing the sounds and everything else come back. It was quite remarkable.
I mean, having been there, it's quite staggering to know that it has this kind of recent history of being something completely different and being rewilded. And because when you're there, you get the sense that you're in a prehistoric land that's never changed over the eons. It's just incredible. The nature of the land is so raw, and as you said, it's a big 5 game reserve. It's incredible.
Dan, the only other people that were rewilding on the planet, because rewilding wasn't a term that was used. I mean, nobody really understood it, and the mission was just to clear the land and practice agriculture and produce crops and everything else. Were Yellowstone National Park. They were bringing back the bears and the wolves, and here we were bringing back the dung beetles, the oxpeckers, and the big 5 and everything else.
Incredible.
So it was fascinating. And then, of course, you see the finished product in one of our lodges. And that's one of the lodges you actually stayed in, which is Founders Lodge. And we've obviously named it Founders Lodge for very good reason, because Dad being the pioneer there today, there are something like 16 other Shamwaris dotted around the Eastern Cape. So while he was developing Shamwari in the early 90s, all those farmers laughed at him. They said, this guy's going to be out of here in a matter of a couple of years. What does he think he's doing? He'll be bust. And, they'd brag about how their great-grandfather shot out the last hyena. And so, and then you fast forward and you start seeing all these other farmers ripping down their fences, chucking out the sheep, goats, and cattle, and bringing back the wildlife. And so the Eastern Cape is now, as a result of Dad's pioneering work, turned into a very serious Big 5 conservation and tourism destination.
And what a destination it is. I mean, you guys can see the picture on screen, and you're right, Paul. I had the incredible privilege of staying right there at Founders Lodge inside of the Shamwari Game Reserve, and it's, as I say, I mean, it's just, well, it's indescribable, really, because once you get outside of that perimeter fence that you can see in the distance there, where the tree line starts, and you're in the bush. I mean, it's absolutely, genuinely the most raw landscape that I could hope to have ever visited, and I had the incredible privilege of not just staying there but seeing the animals in the park, in the game reserve. It's just heaven. It's an incredible place.
It's a very special place, and I was a game ranger there. That was one of my first jobs ever. So I was privileged to take guests out and have a lot of fun out there in the reserve, and really just get under the skin of it and appreciate it so much as a youngster. So very, very fortunate.
It really is incredible. I know we talked about the turning point for the country, and I know this is a big, important moment for you guys, and where things really kind of...
It is, Dan, South Africa was obviously coming out of apartheid, and it was very, very tense. You talk about difficulties and challenges, and obviously COVID being one of those big ones that it's affecting everybody. But you can imagine South Africa, it was pretty much in a very similar state, because there was zero tourism. We were on the brink of a civil war. We obviously had this great man standing head and shoulders above everything, just saying, come, and a bit, he could have been a very bitter man, but instead he just embraced the country and said, no ways that I'm going to let this thing go up in smoke, and took the charge. And of course, in 1995, South Africa was given the opportunity to host a major international event, being the Rugby World Cup.
Right.
And Nelson adorned the Springbok rugby jersey, which was a real symbol of Afrikaner and nationalism and old apartheid. And he walked out onto the field, and every person on that field stood up and they just started shouting, Nelson, Nelson. From the toughest Afrikaans guys that were so against this change. And it was such a goosebump moment. So much so that Clint Eastwood and Matt Damon did the movie, with Morgan Freeman starring as well. Invictus, So I call it the Invictus moment. It was the turning point. The world was watching South Africa. We pulled off this major event, and the floodgates to tourism opened. And Shamwari was the closest game reserve to Cape Town at the time, and it was also malaria free. And then, of course, we were just so it's all about location, I guess.
It's lovely to see some of the people are just enjoying the story you're telling already so much, and there's some lovely comments coming in, which you can see on your screen right now.
Yeah, I can.
And the wonderful comment from Chris Morgan right there that I was sharing just a moment ago. And there's a slightly more personal message for you there now, Paul, which I want you to see.
Thank you.
I'm
glad she's watching.
We're very glad you're watching. It's nice to see you, or to know you're watching. And but yeah, I mean, it's just incredible to hear you talk about this, right from the word go, before it was even the Shamwari Game Reserve, and to hear these incredible stories. And then, as I said, there's this wonderful link to the Born Free Foundation as well. And we kind of teetered on the edge of that when we spoke with Virginia the other day, and also Will prior to that. But I wonder if you could go into a bit of detail about how things unfolded between Shamwari and Born Free back in the day.
It's a great story. I mean, I was quite young at the time, but I've heard Dad tell it many, many times. So what happened was Virginia and the team had come across some lions in Tenerife, and they were on top of a rooftop bar, a male and a female, called Anthea and Rafi, believe it or not. And it was to draw, obviously, attention and traffic to this pub. And they were on this in a tiny cage, the size of a ship container. I mean, it's ridiculous. So Born Free stepped in and they rescued these lions. And then they were stuck in Kent, a big cat sanctuary in Kent. And so there was a lovely compromise for them. And then I think Dad was introduced to the CEO of Thomson's Airlines, if I'm not mistaken, or was maybe called Britannia at the time. And Virginia introduced them. And he introduced Dad to Virginia, and then the rest is kind of history. You know, Virginia said, we've got these big cats sitting in Kent, and Dad, being an opportunist and a caring person, of course, just thought to himself, well, let's rehome these guys. I mean, what they're doing here, let's get them back if we can. And no barrier stood in his way. You know, he obviously had got to get very particular permits to create a sanctuary on a game reserve. And an enclosed, it's all about zoo permits and everything else. Cool. They're very particular permits you've got to get, and it's never easy. So he muscled on and managed to get these permits, and then they arrived. I was there for the arrival as a youngster, still at boarding school, and they stepped out, and it was the first time they'd ever felt African bush under their paws, and it was an amazing experience, and the start of quite an incredible journey, because it wasn't just about these two lions. They were the sort of flagships, but the rest followed. We ended up doing multiple rescues with Born Free, and we built this amazing rapport with Virginia and Will, and it was the Born Free family. People like Ann Tudor and Shirley and so many more. Very, very special. And so there are two sanctuaries at the game reserve today. There's one up in the north and one down in the south, and they're full. And I believe they're going to make some more space for a further four lions once things change in the world.
Absolutely. Virginia was just telling us that very story. The 4 lions that you guys will remember seeing in the red trailer, kind of like a circus trailer. The 4 lions were in at the end of my conversation with Virginia, just before we showed the video of King, where of course King was also released into the Shamwari Big Cat Sanctuary, and all thanks to you and your dad and that incredible generosity, making it all possible in the first place.
Yeah, and they should be back in Africa. It's the right place. And a lot of people say, well, these lions, I mean, what do you do with them? And you're spending so much money on moving them back to Africa. Shouldn't it just go into conservation? I think they become ambassadors for those lions and animals that are in zoos and circuses across the world today. And that we all know in this day and age should surely not be happening, but it still does. And it's so important. And also the world of canned lion hunting and all of that today. Every guest and kid that comes through those sanctuaries at Shamwari today are educated on this, and hopefully we plant a little seed in all of them.
Yeah, well, I don't doubt it, and I mean, I think,
Mm.
and you know, you do an amazing job of spreading that message even further than just the folks who have the privilege of stepping onto the land and seeing it, because I know you guys do an incredible amount of work. And this is just, I mean, this is just fascinating to hear about the foundations of it all, and where it, you know, the ethos and the principles behind it. But of course, you know, you're here as CEO of the Mantis Collection, and the Mantis. I mean, maybe you can just describe a little bit about what the Mantis Collection is first, but then more importantly, moving on to the reason why this is so closely related to a discussion about conservation, because it's not an obvious thing. It's not necessarily what people would expect when they find out what Mantis Collection actually is. There's no given that you'd be as involved and not just involved, but spearheading conservation efforts. Tell us a little bit about Mantis.
Sure. Okay. So what I will tell you quickly is we sold Shamwari and two other big game reserves in about 2000, and I would say we exited probably in 2010, 11. Just so that your viewers understand that.
Yeah.
And it was bought by, Shamwari in particular was bought by the Dubai government. And everybody said, oh, what has Adrian done? And blah, blah, blah. It was the right move for Dad. You know, he's an entrepreneur and he's a businessman, but he's a serious conservationist too. But he decided that the time was right to exit, and he has his reasons for that, which I won't go into now. But the Dubai guys that own it today have been unbelievable custodians to the land, the community. They've spent $25 million on upgrading the facility. So that it's a very important product to them. It's one of their flagships in their greater business. And so we're out of there. But what we did do is we kept a little patch of Africa, and that Founders Lodge that you stated is what we still have today. I mean, it's a commercial lodge, and it sits on about 300 hectares. And all our guests that come there stay in the Founders Lodge, and they get to traverse all over Shamwari. So we still do game drives into Shamwari. And I think it's really special for Dad to have a little piece of Shamwari left. So there it is. Yeah, it's a very beautiful place. We've got quite a few species that roam our 300 hectares, but then of course we have the playground being Shamwari. Cool. But so to come back to your question about Mantis, off the back of the success of Shamwari, we acquired and got involved in several other game reserves and hotels, and so we ended up with about 7. And in 2000, we thought, okay, well, it's time now to create an umbrella brand for these several hotels strewn across South Africa. And we thought of the Platinum Collection and this collection. We came up with all these naff names. And then Dad was sitting down to dinner with Dr. Ian Player, the late Dr. Ian Player. He is the great golfer, Gary Player's brother, and he was ultimately the guy who saved the white rhino from extinction in the 50s and the 60s when there were really very few left. The late Dr. Ian Player came up with the name Mantis. He said he had a dream that night, and he thought long and hard, and he came up with the name Mantis. And I'm not going to go into the whole backstory of it, but the most beautiful thing about Mantis is it is the prey mantis, and for me it's the acronym, because the acronym that we developed is man and nature together is sustainable. So I think that's quite beautiful in this day and age. It worked quite well. One of our marketing guys came up with that name, and so we've embraced it now, and we live by that as a group. And I think we are a hotel group today. We probably have about 20% of our portfolio, maybe 30% is in boutique. So in Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Johannesburg, London, and so we've got this little set of boutique hotels. Right. And as far as possible, we try and keep those as green as we can in terms of little things like light bulbs, electricity usage, all of those things. But the core is really the eco lodges. And so those boutique hotels feed the eco lodges with clients. And so we're a collection today of eco lodges and eco retreats. And we've got a few boats in our collection too. The Zambezi Queen being one of the flagships. And that sits on the Chobe River up in Botswana. And so we've just this amazing little collection of eco-ness today. And I think what I'd love to, we'll talk about the future of Mantis probably a little bit later on in the conversation, but that's who we are today. Just this collection of remarkable little eco lodges spread across all the different continents.
And things really changed, or at least evolved, shall we say, in 2018 with a massive partnership deal that you guys are part of, didn't they? What happened there?
Yeah, that was the next deal that we did. So after selling Shamwari and some of the big game reserves in our collection, we were left with very little, and it was sort of, you'd sold the crown jewels, and how do you now continue with Mantis beyond that? Right. So we went on a bit of a mission, and we acquired those beautiful boats up in the Zambezi and the Chobe, and we fixed up Founders Lodge, which became a flagship, and we've got a few other remarkable, beautiful properties. And suddenly there was something there. It was quite unique. And then I went and discovered this jewel on the continent of Antarctica, which is owned by a friend of mine. And it's the only lodge or hotel on Antarctica. And I know a lot of people will say, well, what the hell do you want to go and do anything there for? We should be keeping it pristine. And I do agree with that. And we've kept it to 10 rooms. It's very, very small. And it's a very expensive destination. And anybody that steps onto that continent is probably going to be a multimillionaire. It's so expensive to get there, but he becomes a big, big ambassador to conservation. And that's why we do it in such a nice, subtle, soft, gentle way with that continent. But it also gave us the ticket to say that we are the only hotel group on all 7 continents, which is pretty cool. And we're treading really lightly. So I think that's quite special. We built this really interesting aura around Mantis post Shamwari, and suddenly we got a knock on the door in 2017 from this massive hotel group called Accor, and Accor are number 2 to Marriott in the world. So Marriott is number 1, Accor number 2, Hilton number 3, and Accor was a French business. And Dad and I got summoned to Paris, and of course we went and had a listen. And we had a wonderful chat with a gentleman called Stephen Daines. He's from England and living in Paris. And he just said, guys, we're quite interested in your business. We see it as a fascinating little business. It might not be typical of what we acquire because, we're only into the big stuff. But there's a real little gem here that you've created that we think we could turn into a sort of masterpiece with you. And so we decided to go on this journey, and they acquired 50% of our management company, Mantis. And that image there is Dad, myself, and Andrew Muir, who's from the Wilderness Foundation, with the chairman of Accor, Sebastian Bazin. And he's the most incredible guy. I have to say second to my dad, but he really is. He's a private equity man. His heart's in the right place. He's dynamic. He's turning this old sort of stale Accor brand into one of the most dynamic. It's really been fascinating. We all look up to this guy. There's something about him that's going to make Accor really shine. And I think he's very proud to have Mantis in their court today because obviously if you look at Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, Radisson, none of them own an eco brand. Suddenly Accor do. And they've given us all this autonomy. They don't want to just come there and start bullying us into how we should run our business. They've been amazing. They've just said, guys, it's about you, Adrian, and your team. Keep going. And we'll put a few checks and balances in place, but you guys understand your DNA better than any of us. And so please keep going. And what it's brought to us is the most amazing loyalty program, which we never had before, and this interesting global distribution system. Right. And also, they've got 300 guys and girls that are looking at new development opportunities. And normally, when an eco-lodge opportunity crossed their desk, they would just throw it in the bin and say, well, we don't play in that space, so we don't understand it. But now they're getting all these owners saying, can you help us with an eco-lodge we had one today in Turkey. And the guy phoned us up and said, I've got this amazing opportunity. Can you help navigate this and speak to the owner and see if you can do something? And we can. So we're talking to a big group in Jordan, and they want us to they've got big hotels around Petra, but they don't have eco-lodges. So we're going to take a bit of our Africa DNA to Jordan potentially. And we'll have game ranges that talk about the topography and the stars and history, and then take them down in a Land Rover to Jordan, to Petra, to the actual site, and guide them. And and then we'll embrace community, because we know what that's all about. So it's taking our little Africa DNA and that model that works so well, and you've been on safari, you understand it, to other parts of the world. And I think that's where it's going to get quite interesting for us and for our new big brother.
I think, well, it engages people. You're absolutely right. That model of tourism engages people as it's in the same way as you described about the few people lucky enough to step foot on Antarctica. They're going to come away engaged and very much invested in the conservation of that place because of the visit that they made. And what else occurs to me, which makes it so poignant, what you guys stand for, and the ethos that you bring in with the eco lodges and with the conservation focus, is the fact that this world that we all now live in, the number of times that we've all had the conversation about, we have to review our relationship with the earth. We have to consider our travel plans. Now, what no one's going to stop. Well, maybe some people will, but most people are not going to stop traveling. But what better way to walk into this new future that we're all facing together, with that responsibility that we all feel we need to take, and to do it by working with somebody like yourselves in an eco environment, in a lodge where your footprint is minimized. And I think it's just, you guys, I'm assuming, didn't plan this pandemic, but my goodness, it's what an incredible piece of marketing for what you stand for. Because everyone now, as far as I can hear, we've had people on this broadcast talking about this. Everyone's discussing the need to, Mark Ruffalo, he coined the phrase, we've got to do away with disposable travel, And so when people do, if anyone with an ounce of accountability for the planet is going to be making these considerations, and you're already in place with it, I think it's fantastic what you guys do. And it just shows how progressive you are, and the thought leaders that you guys are.
Yeah, I think, we're going through absolute hell at the moment, as you can imagine. So we've got to just make sure we survive the next 6 months. That's our priority at the moment, and just try and look after our staff and our team that have helped us get this far. So that's the priority. And the sadness with it all is there are going to be, we all know there are going to be lots of casualties. And I've got a call next week with Dad and some smart people to figure out whether we can actually create an eco lodge investment fund, so that we can swoop in and try and help a lot of these distressed properties get back on their feet again. And the fund will be that we would sort of take a piece of equity in their properties, and they could perhaps earn it back over time. But we're there to help. I don't want us to be seen as a vulture, but rather as a helper. In this pandemic. So we that's one of the things we're going to try and do, to see if we can pick up a lot of those distressed properties and just revive them. So because I think Mantis, fortunately, we did the deal with our big brother. So hopefully we'll be standing on our 2 feet in the next 6 months' time, and that we can go forward, because I think we are well primed, as you rightly pointed out, for the future. I think you're going to have a very conscious traveler coming and evolving out of this mess. And I really hope so. Everybody says, the world's going to be so different. I'm not so sure. If we do find a vaccine, or this thing fizzles out, you know what we like. We're human. After anything, we all resort back to our old ways, and we'll be back on planes and blah, blah, blah. I'm not convinced. We've got very short memories. But
I'm with you.
I really do hope that we do start thinking about how we do travel, and something has to change. And I think, as soon as governments start enforcing these rules, then we all jump up and listen. So they're the ones that probably need to step in, because otherwise we're just going to be set free again and go on these crazy trips. I don't know.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, we've seen evidence of it already, where you see the mess that people left the beaches and parks in last weekend. Not only do they have a short memory, but it seems like it's almost as if they're trying to make up for lost time and get out there and trash nature when they have the opportunity. And so all I would say to people, as well as pointing out the fact that Giles has very kindly shared the link in the comments to the Mantis Collection.
Oh, thanks, Giles.
Thanks, Giles. What I would say is, for anybody who is reviewing their travel plans and wanting to have that that reduced footprint, please go check out the Mantis Collection. Giles has put the link in the comments. You can't do better than going to the Mantis Collection, because I've had the privilege of staying in a couple of your properties, and not only are they astounding, but they are really what they say they are, which is eco-friendly. And I hope you do, of course, beyond hope that you guys survive the next 6 months and long into the future, because goodness knows it would be an absolute travesty for many reasons if you didn't, at least not, for all the folks involved that deserve the success of it, but also because of as I say, what you stand for. What you guys stand for is what we need. We need to evolve into that kind of a future where hotel chains think the way you guys think, where you are taking that progressive stance, where you are. And I dare say, I'm guessing here, because I'm no hotel businessman, but I'm guessing that you guys could have made an awful lot more money taking a different route. But that's not the choice you made. You made the right choice because you wanted, as you say, man and nature together is sustainable.
I definitely agree with you there. I mean, there are definitely easier ways to make money. I think we've chosen a tougher route. But you know what? Dad will always say it's a far more fulfilling route. We could be running big corporate businesses and whatever else, but this might not have given us the wealth, but it's certainly given us the stimulation and the excitement. I mean, just the stories that are telling you about me flying around with lions and airplanes and all of that. I mean, that's a rich, lovely experience to have been involved with. It's been far richer for our lives than anything else. So, yeah, we always encourage people to just get involved with it, because wildlife and wilderness fix everything. If you're depressed, what do? You go for a run and you go and appreciate wilderness, and you come back feeling a better person. It's as simple as that. And I think we all forget that is probably the best medicine in the world, but yet we're stuffing it up so badly. So I just try to encourage that. I mean, what more can I say?
I think you put it beautifully, and I mean it really does speak for itself, doesn't it? Because I agree with you. I mean, I think a lot of people would. That's my meditation, is out in the wilderness, out in nature. Yeah. And with that gone, I don't know what we'd have left. And so, where you talk about it's the most fulfilling action to take, and I agree with you. It's wonderful to hear you say that, and you guys really do walk the walk as well as talk the talk, because it's not just that you've got a beautiful set of eco lodges and boutique hotels, but you also are directly involved in conservation in a number of different ways. And I know that in one particular thing that I'd love to talk more about, because I just think it epitomizes what you guys stand for, and it really is an amazing example of what we always talk about on this broadcast, is about bringing guests who are thought leaders, who are leading the way, who, as I said to you before, I feel so privileged to be able to bring you on as a guest, because all I've got to do is shine a light at the people like you who are doing this incredible work. And one of those stories, one of the pieces of incredible work, is the CCFA that you've created. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think this is just such an incredible example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. You've been incredibly complimentary. Thank you. But
it's all deserved.
So when we merged with Accor, Dad was pretty adamant that we set up something that really gives back, and it was key to the deal. The deal almost fell apart because they weren't taking interest in the what had actually built Mantis was our involvement in conservation. So if you take it away, Mantis is gone. So he said, guys, if you want to take Mantis to new heights, we've got to take this seriously. So he said, let's form this thing together. And he and the chairman, Sebastian, agreed to underwrite the startup. And they both put in a chunk of cash and said, here we go, let's do it. And so they formed the CCFA, which stands for, and it says what it does on the jar, which is Community Conservation Fund for Africa.
Right.
And and what it equals is, you take care of community in those rural areas, they will take care of the wildlife for you. And they'll make sure that it's protected. And so that's that is the formula for the foundation. And so what we did was we decided, rather than us setting up our own projects in Africa, because that takes a lot of work and dedication, and there's so many people doing it already. So instead of reinventing the wheel and copying and doing whatever and just trying to do your own stuff, we instead chose the best in class, and we went to 3 NGOs doing what we believe is a remarkable job in Africa. And the first is the Wilderness Foundation, which is based in Port Elizabeth, and Dad was the chairman of for many, many years. And obviously it was founded by Dr. Ian Player. So that was the first one. The second one was the Tusk Trust, and Charlie Mayhew and his team are behind that. And that, the patron to that is Prince William, and they're doing remarkable stuff across the continent of Africa. Right. And then the third one, of which Prince Harry is a patron, is called Africa Parks. And they too, I mean, they go to a country like Senegal, and who may have had a civil war or whatever. The country's messed up, the national park's been totally destroyed, and then they start turning their economy around, and Africa Parks swoops in, and they get massive funding out of the lottery fund in Holland, and they pull that back into the park and they fix it up again. And so these are 3 big NGOs that we support wholeheartedly as the CCFA. And kind of where we wanted to take it to is, I mean, there's a picture of Catherine Jenkins and her lovely husband, Andrew Levitas, and they're supporters of the Wilderness Foundation. And Abby and I have got to know them very well, and they're just beautiful people dedicated to that cause. And they are Catherine and Andrew are patrons to and ambassadors to the Wilderness Foundation. But so we support these 3 organizations, and we've got a couple of smaller projects on our own. I know our team are working on a bee project, and a couple of other little initiatives that we channel through Mantis. Right. But it is all about embracing the community. You know, we all keep saying it's time to look over the fence now, and embracing that community, because the moment you stop that, you're going to have the influx of poaching occurring, and that's where it becomes problematic. So particularly now with all the game reserves shut down, there's no income for those communities, and of course they've got to survive. So if we're not feeding them, they're going to resort to a bushmeat trade and poaching and everything else. And you understand that, I understand that, I'm a dad. It's all about survival at the moment. So we've got a great initiative running now with Accor. It's called the Heartist Fund. There's 70 million euros sitting in that, and they've allowed us to tap into that. And we are feeding some of the communities, the vulnerable communities around some of our parks, just to keep them going for the next few months while we get rid of this virus and this pandemic, and let tourism return and sustain these lives again.
So I think that's just like, it puts a lump in my throat to hear you say a thing like that, because if just in case anybody was watching this and I'm sure they weren't by this point listening to what you've been talking about, Paul, but for anybody who was sitting wondering why on earth we would have the CEO of a hotel chain onto a conversation about conservation, now you know why. And now you know why I refer to them as thought leaders and people who literally epitomize the kind of values that we desperately need in this world. And I mean, the way you've just described it about looking after the communities, you know, one of the I'm just an actor and a filmmaker, and I tend to I happen to have a great passion for animals. But one thing I've learned in all of the conversations I've had and all of the incredible privileges I've had of traveling to places like Shamwari and elsewhere in Africa, the one common statement that everybody makes when we talk about conservation and what makes it successful and effective is engagement with the community. That's the one thing that everybody's clear on, is that's the key, is the community. Because as I've been reading over the years about, you know, the work that you guys do, and talking, thankfully, you know, having the great good fortune of knowing you guys and knowing and seeing the work you do. It's absolutely, you know, and hand in hand with someone like Wilderness Foundation Africa, whose ethos is exactly the same. It's all about people and animals. And for all of us out there who so desperately care for the animals, you'll all be familiar with that very, very real barrier that you come up against with people, which is, what about people? Human beings always focus on people. We always focus on, the collective human race, focus on people above everything else. So when you're talking about an organization like Mantis, when you're talking about Wilderness Foundation Africa, when you're talking about CCFA, people are being deeply, deeply cared for. The lives of people, and not just the people, but the future generations of those communities is being looked after. I think it's exemplary what you guys do, and that's precisely why I wanted to have you on and consider it to be such a privilege to have you on talking about this stuff. So, and as I said before, any compliments I give you are absolutely warranted and justified, because I've seen it myself. I mean, I've seen the work that you guys do. In fact, talking about Shamwari, when I had the privilege of being at Founders, the game ranger that was driving us around, a wonderful guy, was, unbeknownst to me, until we actually got further into the week and the conversations we were having, was on the first program that you guys and Wilderness Foundation Africa put together. To take children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and disadvantaged backgrounds in an African community is a very different story from disadvantaged in this country. It's truly disadvantaged. It's people like children who were orphaned because both parents died from AIDS, and these children are taken into a program, taught valuable life skills such as catering or game rangering or anti-poaching rangers, and then given jobs, and they literally become role models for their community. So it has this incredible ripple effect that goes on and on for generations, and I think it's genius. And everyone wins.
I'll tell you how everybody, I'm really referring to a third world sort of continent like Africa is. And I hate referring to it like that, but just from an economics point of view. But, Dad always said, and he still does today, he tells a great story about how he pulled up at a petrol station, a gas station in South Africa. And there was a gentleman there who was in his tracksuit. He was ready to go home. He had taken off his Caltex branded kit, and he was about to run off. And Dad pulled up, because they fill up your car in South Africa, not like here you do it yourself. And he said, "Listen, let me help you." And Dad said, "Hang on, but you're about to leave now, aren't you?" He said, "No, I'm all about service," he said to my dad. And Dad said, "You know what? Get in my car." And he took him on. And he got into Shamwari, and he trained him up to got him his driver's license, trained him up to be a game ranger. He became, I think, a lodge manager eventually. And then one of his guests flew him to New York City. Wow. And there was a simple guy who had nothing. And Dad's whole theory there is if every South African that's made it in life, and there are lots of them there that have, did that, and did that to one person in their life, or one person a year in their life, the change that we could make to our country by taking on those disadvantages. And I think that's always resonated with me. I think it's a beautiful little story about, because we all wonder how we can get involved. There's a clever way if you've made it in life. I think it's a beautiful story.
I think it's a beautiful story as well, and as well as that, it's a real tangible working example of what we're discussing tonight. It's that conservation and community support in action, real examples of it happening, and happening in the case of you guys and CCFA, Wilderness Foundation Africa, and all of you collectively. It happens over and over and over again with numerous individuals and changing lives left, right, and center. And coming back around to the animals. If you can just explain for the folks that, because it's a simple concept, and I think it's really it's overlooked far too often by people in the animal conservation space. If you can just explain the very simple, basic facts behind the principle of, if you look after the people, uplift those people, uplift the community, you'll be taking care of the animals too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just have to compare it to probably the Shamwari model is a good one. If you look at what happened pre-Dad buying all of that land up, I think the 20 farms that make up the 25,000 hectares that Shamwari stands on today, probably employed 20 people. So the farmers were all absentee farmers. So they lived in PE or in Port Elizabeth. They had to have other jobs to sustain these farms that had just been denuded of everything. And so they'd have a couple of laborers running around looking after the sheep and the goats and that was it. And then suddenly, Dad arrives on the scene, and the perfect storm happens, and tourism floodgates open and everything else. Suddenly, Shamwari then, I think, employed at its peak 350 people, from 20 to 350.
Right.
And then you've got the multiplier effect of the collar hire companies, the food and beverage companies bringing supplies in, the building that took place in the reserve, all of that. It probably ended up being thousands of people. But just talking around Shamwari, you've suddenly taken that township of, call it 10,000 people down the road, called Patterson, and that used to employ 20 people, now employing upwards of 350 people. Suddenly they start falling in love with it, and those individuals that are working at Shamwari are feeding families of 6 or 10 or whatever else. And so they all become protectors of that land, and they start seeing value, because there's an economy now that's brewed out of completely nothing. And so, now just coming back, because this is now where it goes wrong, we bring it back to COVID, and all the redundancies and everything else that are likely to be made, not just with Shamwari, but many of the other reserves in the area. What happens now? And so those communities are left high and dry, and they've got to get food. So that's where it gets scary, and it just shows you how fragile it is. You take that ecotourism sustainability model away, it all collapses overnight. And so that's the power of it, I think.
You've described it brilliantly, and it's exactly that. I just wanted people to hear it from you as someone who's literally doing it, literally living and breathing what you're talking about with those fantastic working examples of it happening. And it's such a simple concept, and it makes perfect sense. I just think it's often missed because it's too easy for people to think that the answer to the poaching crisis is guys with guns surrounding the perimeter fence, and it's just not. That's just not it. That's not going to work. Whereas your way is the long-term effective way, and you have my wholehearted support forever. Now, these conversations always go so fast; it drives me insane, because I'm so into the conversation. I want to keep going, but we're already nearing the hour mark. And and the other thing is that I know, Paul, you've been incredibly generous with your time, because you've got visitors, and you're even giving us this time despite the fact you've got visitors. So just before you go, what I'd love for you to be able to take the opportunity to do is to tell us a little bit about the future of the Mantis story and how that's going to unfold in your eyes. And I've got some photographs to share, which I'd love to share, and just to show people the kind of things that you guys have up your sleeve.
Dan, we some of the more remote things, and you'll see a picture of St. Helena there. I'll tell you a bit about that very quickly. So St. Helena Island is probably one of the most remote islands in the world. It's in the South Atlantic. It's a British protectorate, of which I think the British government have about 11 around the world. And this is where Napoleon was exiled and later died. They felt that worried about him escaping again, so they popped him on this island in the middle of nowhere. But there's a community of a few thousand saints, they call them, that live on the island. They've all got British passports. And the only way you could ever access this particular island was by Royal Mail ship from Cape Town. It took 5 days to get there. Then you had to spend about a week there, and then 5 days to get back.
Sounds like my kind of place.
Yeah, in this day and age, and you will like to know that it's COVID clean. There's not one case there.
I'm on my way.
It's unfortunately, I have yet to have been there, but Mom and Dad sailed there when the ship was still going, and the governor and the British government said to us, "Mantis, can you build the first hotel there?" So we did, and so we tend to do these things in really obscure places. I mean, they really are out of there, like Antarctica. You could show a picture of Antarctica next, because I know you've got that, and you'll see the igloos that we build there. They sort of prefabricated. They are bolted down onto the rocks. As I said, there are only 10 of those, and they stay there all year round. And you can only open this for for 2 months of the year, because then the blizzards roll in and you can't land a plane there. So the flight is due south from Cape Town. It takes you 5 hours, and 3 hours into the flight, you start seeing sheet ice. It's the most amazing, amazing thing. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was flying to another planet. That's how exotic and extraordinary it is. And you know, your viewers probably visualize Antarctica, because we all see it on the Attenborough shows, and that it's just this flat sheet of ice. But there are mountains there that are extraordinary, that you've never seen before in your life. And you fly in there and you think, what the hell?
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's a very, very special place. I think I'm the only idiot in the world that went there on a day trip. So I only spent 8 hours there. But trust me, it was lots of fun and just a real eye-opener. And it did help that we were based at the Russian base. They hadn't seen humans for about 10 months, and they whipped out this monster bottle of vodka. So we had a lot of fun.
There you go.
That was our arrival there about 10 years ago. But it is a beautiful continent. So, but just coming back to the future, I mean, I think I alluded to it earlier. I think, I'd like to think that we're going to come out of this probably bruised and battered, but that we are going to be well primed for a traveler that becomes more conscious. And we want to just take that Mantis DNA across the continent. We've just signed up our first lodge in Costa Rica. We don't own it, but we have a franchise model. So they literally there we go. That's it. Origins.
That's awful.
And the owner is all into sustainability and protecting the forest there and everything else. So he ticks all the Mantis boxes. So we go and screen the place. I unfortunately didn't go on this trip. 2 of my colleagues did, but I will get out there one day. And they came back with massive smiles on their face, and they said, "This thing's got Mantis written all over it." And the owner thinks like we do in Mantis. So we signed them up, and basically they get access to the distribution and the loyalty program. And we fly in there probably once a year just to do a quality assurance check. And that's how that works. So it's our first real step into South America, and we hope to expand and identify other similar properties in other countries across that continent. I mentioned to you, Petra and the country Jordan.
Yes.
The owners there realize that they've got big city hotels, and they believe that we should be doing something together in the eco space. So we're going to take a bit of that DNA there. This is a picture of a development that we did in Sharjah. And Sharjah is in the Middle East. It's in the UAE. So there's 7 emirates that make up the UAE, for those that don't know. Sharjah is one of them, and you'll all be familiar with Dubai. There's Abu Dhabi, and there's Ras Al Khaimah, and there's another couple. So we did this development, which is an eco lodge on the beach in Sharjah. And so our pipeline in the Middle East is quite fascinating. So I went to, for the first time ever, and I was a bit nervous to go there, was to Saudi. And obviously there's a new ruler in place there, and he's a youngster. And he is all about, revolutionizing tourism, because obviously there is no tourism. It's all domestic, or it's all Middle Eastern tourism to Saudi. It's never been open up to the Western world. And none of us know how beautiful that country is. I'm starting to see video footage come out of that country like I've never seen before. The guys that developed and chiseled out Petra were from Saudi. So there's a Petra on steroids in Saudi. And, the Red Sea, they reckon, is better than the Maldives. And there are mountains there that are as spectacular as what I was talking about in Antarctica, that have never been unearthed by any Westerners, So I think, he's changing a lot of things there for good, and often people say, hang on, should you even be associating with Saudi? Women aren't allowed to do this, that, and the next thing. And I say, you know what? This guy's all about change. Look at South Africa 25 years ago. Right. Everybody said, "Oh, you can't go do this, that, and that. You can't embrace South Africa." You've got to admire change and embrace it, and you'll get in there early. And my theory is, let's Mantis get in there early, because I think that the ruler's doing a phenomenal job in Saudi, and I want to be there, and I want Mantis to be there. It's going to be a great journey, and if we can plant that little Mantis DNA in a country like that in the early stages, we'll do them proud and ourselves proud, I think.
I want you there as well, because if anybody if anybody is going to be making those changes and driving things forward the way that the good people would want them driven forward, it's you guys, because you've demonstrated it all the way through, as with that incredible history you've just given us. And I have no, God, I mean, of course, who knows what's going to happen? It's an insane, crazy time right now. But God, we want you to survive through this thing and come out the other side and just keep doing what you do, because it's incredible. It's incredible. You guys are so much more than a chain of hotels. You're a shining example of how people should think, whatever business they're in. I think that's the key thing. It's about, we've had some wonderful guests on this broadcast. I remember Louis Sahoyas, who the Oscar-winning director of The Cove and the recent The Game Changers and Racing Extinction, and that was his message to people, was do what you do, but do it for the greater good. And you guys do that. You guys just do it, and you've been doing it for decades, and it's incredible. And I'm so grateful to you for doing that. So God, I hope you come out these crazy times, and I hope that you do end up in Saudi and Antarctica and wherever else you want to go. Where in Costa Rica is it, by the way? Because I love Costa Rica, and
I knew you were going to ask me that. Now it's actually on the border of Nicaragua. I know that much. You can actually see Nicaragua. So.
Incredible. Well, Costa Rica is an incredible country where I've had the great pleasure of spending a few months, and what a place. And they've got.
But it's on the list. I really do want to go there because I hear so many great things about it.
Yeah, you'll love it. You'll actually. Sorry, this is perfect timing. Let's just have a little visit from Kiki while we're here. There we go. She's making her customary visit. Now, before we say goodbye to you, Paul, I just want to share with you guys some important news for Sunday. My next guest on Sunday will be at the earlier time of 5 p.m. We're trying something new because we can do what we want. We make our own rules. This is our show, right? We'll do whatever we want. And so I'm very proud to tell you that on Sunday at 5 p.m. UK, so let's work this out, 9 o'clock Pacific, midday Eastern, my guest will be the wonderful Nicky Campbell, who you'll all either know or certainly know his voice. He's a bit of a national treasure. He presents the BBC Radio 5 Live Breakfast program. He's back when I was a youngster watching Top of the Pops. He was the presenter of that. Long Lost Families, the BBC's The Big Questions, all kinds of incredible things. And most of all, an absolutely wonderful human being, very kind, compassionate man who makes it his business to try to make the world a better place for both people and animals. So join me on Sunday at 5 o'clock when we'll be talking to Nicky, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man, and I can't wait to introduce you all to him. So please be here, 5 o'clock Sunday evening. Mr. Paul Gardiner, good Lord. Such a pleasure. What a pleasure. I'm so grateful to you and for you. I really am so grateful for, and to Adrian and to Abs and to all of you guys, because you just epitomize everything that's good in the world. I dream of a world filled with people like you running all the businesses.
Thank you. That's a very, very lovely compliment. And I must say to you, Dan, I think you're the unsung hero, because I hear from so many people that you and I need to spend more time together, because you are so passionate about wildlife and conservation, and that needs to be recognized. We need more of you, that's for sure. So I appreciate you putting me on your platform and all of these great conversations that you're having. Keep them going. Don't let this downtime be the time to do this. I think you're onto something here, and if there's anything I can do to support you going forward, and any introductions to other people that I think you should be talking to, maybe Catherine Jenkins is one of them. Maybe we can get her on.
Yes. That's a big yes. Love to have her on.
So I think let's collaborate. It's all about that at the moment.
It's all about that. You're absolutely right. You, as we've discussed, the way, and thank you, by the way, for your lovely, lovely words. I take it as a huge compliment, especially coming from you. And where we've talked about the approach that you guys take, it's all about collaboration. That's exactly what we're saying. And I'm delighted to say that one of the greats that you've been talking about, the Wilderness Foundation Africa, Andrew Muir, who runs the show there, is going to be one of our guests as well.
Brilliant.
But I would absolutely love to take you up on that offer of connections, because that's what this is all about. This is, and you have helped to carry us forward on this journey on this episode beautifully, because that's exactly what this is all about. It's giving people hope, inspiration, empowerment, and you've done that in droves. And I can't thank you enough, my friend, Mr. Paul Gardiner. Thank you. Thank you so much. So
thank you, my friend. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Dan. I really look forward to seeing you in person when we're over the worst. And as I said, we'll probably all be bruised and battered, but we'll be ready to really forge ahead, I think. So
we will.
I'm excited for the future. I really am.
Yeah, me too. I feel like we can. I think it's interesting. People have talked about this from the very beginning of this happening. I think there's been a lot of hope and a lot of people believing that this could be a shift. And I do believe that. I don't think anything's going to be forced on anybody, but I think that this situation gives us all a choice, and we get to choose which direction we take. And obviously, it's easy for people who are on a good path to continue on that good path and be even more determined. But it's equally easy for people who are on the negative path to stay there and go out and trash beaches and nature reserves and leave litter lying around behind them. But I think that's where this is so important. It's on us. I believe the difference is if we pick up the ball and run with it faster than we've ever run before, because of what's happening, because it is an opportunity. And again, I think you guys lead the way in that regard, and it gives me such pleasure to be able to shine a spotlight on what you guys do. So thank you again, and I so appreciate you taking the time to join us and tell us these incredible stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all your listeners too. I really appreciate it.
Yes, to all of you guys, thank you so much for being on this evening. Join me at 5 o'clock on Sunday, and we will see you then. Lots of love. Spread the love and peace.
All right.
Bye, guys.